I'm so excited today to be introducing you to Ted Liu, one of our chief economists here at the Upwork Research Institute. For those of you who may be new to the Upwork Research Institute, we have a really simple mandate, and that is to change work one insight at a time. We've been around for a little over a year now and have been publishing a lot of insights based on survey data, but also our platform data. And what we begin to uncover as we actually begin to analyze our own labor market that we oversee on our platform. And so today I brought on Ted to really help us understand, I think, the $1 million question that many people are asking themselves, either as a worker or as a leader, and that is, how is AI transforming work today? And let me tell you, after working very closely with Ted for over a year now, he's got some answers. But Ted, over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Hi, everyone. I am Ted Liu, Research Manager of the Upwork Research Institute. I have been here about 1 year after receiving my PhD in economics. So I am an economist by training, very, I would say, quantitative and mathematical, but my background prior to the PhD was a combination of anthropology and economics. So I would say I approach a lot of economic problems or research problems I do through an anthropological lens. What that means is that I often try to consider the broader social and cultural influences on individual decision making, if that makes sense. So that's
Oh, yeah.
introduction about me. Yeah, very happy about and excited about the discussion today.
Oh, thank you, Ted, so much. And I have to be honest with you, for those who are just getting to know Ted for the first time here, I've worked with a lot of economists throughout my career, and I have to say, being able to combine a little bit of the human psychology, the cultural implications with the economics, I think is a really cool skill set. And we're super happy that Ted is here and helping support this work. So, Ted, we're going to get into the meat of the discussion so we don't leave our audience hanging too much. And please, by all means, if you guys have questions as we're having this conversation, put them in the chat and we'll be monitoring and following along. So, Ted, first question. You have the opportunity to look at our Upwork platform data every day. What is the overall, like if you could summarize, what is the overall trend that you're seeing on of Upwork as it relates to AI?
Yeah, happy to answer that. Actually, let me first start by saying that just how lucky I feel to be working with the platform data that Upwork has. It's a very rich data set, and as an empirical economist, this is very much a sandbox for me to play in to kind of test all the frontier ideas about technologies and future work. But to answer your question, I will actually I think it's actually useful to start with a type of conceptual framework. So here I'm going to borrow some ideas from studies by Asimoglu and co-authors, in which they look at how new technologies affect the labor market.
Mm.
According to them, there are at least two types of sometimes counteracting effects that are going on. One is the replacement effect, the other one is the reinstatement effect. So reinstatement effect means that there may be new tasks and work that may be emerging due to new technologies like AI. So earlier this year, we did a very comprehensive study about the impact of AI on a labor market like Upwork. So what we found is that reinstatement effect of AI seems quite prevalent, especially in some technical work categories like data science and engineering, and and for other categories like writing and translation, what we found is that the replacement effect may be more noticeable. But I do want to emphasize that across all of the work categories, we do observe that high value work is benefiting from the rise of AI, especially generative AI, in terms of the earnings and job posts. And the work domains that here I'm talking about are the 12 work categories in which the Upwork labor market is organized. And I will emphasize that this high value work benefiting from AI is also clear for writing and translation as well. So this
Interesting.
study, yeah, so this study does have some limitation, I would say. It is an aggregated view of the platform data that we have. It is very informative, but I would say it is an incomplete picture of what's going on at the micro level, for instance, the job posts and the contract level. Additionally, some of the results that I mentioned, especially earnings, they reflect the final execution of the work, but not
Mhm.
necessarily in terms of whether and how AI is part of the execution.
Got it. And Ted, it's funny as you're talking about high value, maybe for those in the audience who might not know, how would you define high value in this study?
Yeah, so we define that as any contracts that have over $1,000 in payoff. And so that's the benchmark we go after.
Yeah. And I think that framework is so helpful. I mean, as a research institute, I think any sort of good research starts, we always are standing on the shoulders of giants. And so being able to stand with those who have already done some great work in this space, I think it just gives more credibility, hopefully, to the work that we're doing. Now, I want to zoom in a little bit to this writing and translation category that you've talked about.
Mhm.
I know you've done some deeper work on here because I'm hearing reinstatement effect. I'm hearing, I always think of it as more of a substitution effect coming from the work behavior space. Um, but from your perspective, do people need to be worried about jobs in writing and translation? And what are you actually seeing there? Any sort of paradoxes that might be emerging that you could help explain?
Yeah, I'm very glad you brought that up. I think this is the type of narrative that we've been seeing kind of in the space, I would say.
Yeah.
And on the surface, right, the reinstatement effect of AI does not seem super noticeable in translation compared to other categories.
Hmm.
But like I mentioned before, the results I shared earlier is very much an aggregated view. But I think it sometimes could obscure some of the emerging patterns that we should be paying attention to.
Hmm.
So the study that I just shared with you previously, one of the stats that kind of piqued my interest is how high value work in translation, particularly, have gained 8% in freelancer earnings because of AI. So I think if translation really is jeopardized as by AI, as people are saying, then why do we observe this kind of change? So I think that kind of prompted me into looking deeper into the actual kind of work of translation on the
Yeah.
Upwork platform. So to do that, we query a lot of job posts in translation specifically, and we used natural language processing techniques to analyze the data set.
Yeah.
So what we found is that when you think about translation, you don't necessarily think about AI itself, but what we found is that for high value translation work, AI is becoming kind of infused in the way and the type of work that people are doing. For instance, we saw multilingual AI model training of low resource languages. We also saw freelancers doing quality auditing of output produced by AI, and also some freelancers are even teaching and consulting with clients to show them how to use AI tools more effectively. So I would say the results here really echo some of the internal surveys we've done within Upwork of freelancers, in which we saw that for freelancers that are doing translation work, over 75% of them use AI tools very frequently to complete the work, and over 80% of them overall feel positive about the role of AI in assisting their work. So I guess just to quickly summarize, I do think AI is driving high value work creation.
Mhm. I love that. And I'd be curious for those that are joining us, if you guys are seeing AI influence or impact the way that you're doing your job, and whether or not, as Ted is describing here on our Upwork platform, as our freelancers are working alongside AI, we are seeing that higher value contract go up. But we'd be curious to see for those that are joining us today, how AI is impacting your world. And so, I want to really zoom in a bit more, Ted, on this topic, because I think again, I'm listening, I'm hearing that there's two sides, right, to this equation here with AI and how it's impacting. For me, what I'm hearing as a key takeaway right now is definitely a tool to be working alongside. Those that are working
Mhm.
alongside of this are seem to
Yeah,
be winning in categories even like writing and translation that you might think would have more of a substitution effect happening, but we're actually seeing the type of work change. So
yeah.
let's just take a big step back. As we think about AI, how does the work actually look, especially since ChatGPT, which is hard to believe was introduced, I think was really mainstream in late 2022, but how is it actually changing the type of work that's being done on our platform?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so far the results I have touched on focused on the AI impact itself, but I think
Mm,
sometimes it's really important for us to think about how this impact is taking place. And I preview a little bit based on the discussion I had about AI becoming more infused into translation work. But I think at a more systematic level, we need to think more carefully about or rethink the nature of what AI work looks like, as you mentioned. So I would say this brought us to kind of the main focus of today's discussion, which is the report that we just released,
Mm,
titled "Expanding the Frontier: How People Are Redesigning Work Through AI." And I have to admit, before doing research for this report, I had my own assumption about what
mm,
AI work looked like, right? Because I thought
mhm,
AI work was mostly just very technical. It was just it involved AI modeling or fine tuning and so on. But I think what we found surprised me. I would say the main finding is that AI, especially generative AI, is not just a technical revolution, but also a very broad transformation of how and what people are working on across diverse fields.
mm,
Um, so before I give you kind of the evidence, let me describe to you the methodology. Again, we first need to find out what types of AI work exists in a
mm,
labor market like Upwork. So we gathered and queried tens and thousands of job posts related to AI. And the way we did it was using relevant keywords of AI
mm,
tools and AI models. And then based on this raw set of job post data, we trained a machine learning model to analyze and then classify these job posts to ensure that they are indeed related to either the development or application of AI, so that we're kind of minimizing any false positives.
mm,
And
mhm,
in the report, we provide some data visualization to make the point about how the relative distribution or representation of AI is changing across work domains. So now I give you kind of the main results.
okay.
First of all, it is true that AI is primarily a type of work for technical domains like data science and web design and so on. But I would say things get more interesting when we look at more broadly at other domains and also across time. So in our report, we segmented the analysis into two time periods. The first one is 2020 through 2021, and the second time period is 2022 through the end of 2023. So basically, the second period is
Mhm,
after generative AI came into people's awareness. So what we find is that between 2020 and 2021, traditional AI work was very much heavily concentrated in two key categories, like data science and also the other category is web, mobile, and software development. We call it WMSD. And together, these two accounted for over 70% of the AI-related job posts. But things really changed after 2022. So in the second time period that we looked at, after Gen AI came into the scene, we see that the share of data science and software work or WMSD work are just around 50%. Whereas
mm,
for other work domains like design, marketing, and translation, they actually begin to have much better representation in the so-called AI work universe that we
mm,
gather data for, right? And I do want to emphasize this, just how I was struck by this drastic shift since late 2022. This basically 20 percentage points difference, relative difference, which I think is quite remarkable, because keep in mind that the results that we show in this report are measuring the relative shares of AI work across the main domains of work in the market, like Upwork. But in terms of absolute numbers, we know for a fact that data science job posts, for instance, have grown very substantially since 2022. So this, in other ways, suggests that the growth of AI working in other categories, ones that you don't necessarily think of in relation to AI, like design and so on, they have grown quite substantially as well.
I think it's so interesting. I'd be curious for those that are they're tuning in today with us. I mean, the one way that I'm thinking about this, Ted, in my head is you've got, again, when you think about technology, you think of builders of the tech.
Mhm.
You think
Yeah.
of your machine learning, your data engineers, your data scientists. And so I'll be curious today just to know who's joining us, how many of you are building AI? I actually think some of the survey data that we've collected says, to your point, which matches this, is that's actually a smaller category of the workforce.
Yeah.
And what
Mhm.
is the bigger category and growing category is, again, in layman's terms, I'm just calling operators. They're operating
Mhm.
alongside of AI, they're applying it within their domain. And that 20 percentage point, essentially decrease of data science jobs, and making sure I'm understanding that right, or those technical roles is going to show how profound this change is across the different categories of work. And I think, Ted, the one
Yeah.
question that I have for you, because I'm sure this is going to be top of mind for other people, I used to joke when I gave keynote presentations on the future of work that technology wasn't really changing the way we do our jobs. Like we were still using Microsoft Excel, to do a lot of the statistics and analysis, or some sort of R or Python. We hadn't really, like, because of cloud or robotic process automation hadn't really influenced the way that we were actually doing our day jobs. But I have a funny suspicion this is actually different this time. So, can you describe for us how is ChatGPT, generative AI in particular, different than maybe some of these other technologies that have always really favored the builder side that hasn't really influenced the way that we've operated for at least the last couple decades?
Yeah, I love that question. And I have to tell you, as a PhD trained economist, we're
Mm.
often questioned kind of, is this time different, or is
Yeah,
this question that you're looking at worth considering in terms of how fundamentally it's changing the way we think
right.
about, say, the way people work? But to answer your question, yeah, I would say yes. I think AI is different from other types of recent technologies we've seen related to work. And to test that, we compare our results that I just shared about AI with the results of cloud computing and robotic process automation, or RPA.
Hmm.
So RPA basically is the, as you mentioned, software tech or tool that automates repetitive and rule-based tasks. So essentially, we kind of just repeated the same analysis that we did for the AI job posts, basically just looking at the relative distribution or representation of a particular technology across the main work domains in a labor market like Upwork.
Yep.
Um, and we just repeated that for cloud computing and RPA. And I also want to emphasize that, RP and cloud computing seem to be more mature in terms of the
Hmm.
adoption compared to AI, right? So,
Yeah,
one could argue that these two technologies, they might have like broader reach compared to, say, AI,
sure.
which
That's a good
is
point.
very much more nascent technology. But what we found is quite different from the patterns seen in the AI work. Overall, technologies like cloud computing, RPA, their distribution seems to be heavily concentrated in technical fields like IT and WMSD, but not very diversified across other domains as we saw with AI. And for instance, for RPA, web design and related work, they actually constitute between 70% to 80% of all the work related to RPA. And this relative share is actually quite static in the two time
Hmm.
periods we observed. So basically, there's no broader reach that we saw that has happened with AI. And similar thing with the cloud computing related work. It is very much heavily concentrated, over 80% of them concentrated in IT networking and also web and software design work. So I would say yes, based on these comparative analysis, I do feel confident in saying that AI is really different in terms of how broad, how expansive its reach is in terms of the work that people do and how they work.
Yeah. So I think that's so profound because, again, just thinking through like the last 10 or 15 years of studying this intersection of human behavior and technology, I, have never seen, and again, I'm going to use the word hype and I'll be curious your reaction to that, but I have never seen so much hype across all different C-suite levels and different fields and
Mhm.
disciplines over this technology. Yeah, there was some conversation with CHROs when, we were doing RPA and financial services or moving, from a legacy on-site system to or an on-premise system to the cloud. But it wasn't like this really big, how are we going to now transform work because of this? And I feel like this is the first technology that we've had in a while, maybe since mobile apps and even in web, where we're
Yeah.
actually beginning to ask ourselves a question, wait a second, is the way we're working actually going to fit this new paradigm? And so I'll be curious your reaction to this. And really, at the heart of this, what I want to ask you is, do you think, based on all of your research, that generative AI is a general purpose technology today? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't necessarily categorize AI as a general purpose technology,
Okay.
say like the internet just yet.
Okay.
But I do think it has the potential to be, based on kind of the earlier results I shared with you in terms of just how extensive and wide the range of job categories that AI has touched, at least in a labor market like Upwork. And then, based on kind of our observation of how AI is changing the way people work, not just the way people work, but also the types of work and what they do. Um, so I wouldn't say it is a general purpose technology just yet, but I would
Mhm.
say it has lot of great potentials. And I would say a related point is, and this is kind of an implication that is more immediate for all of us that are thinking about the future of work. So what we have seen is that AI does seem to reduce the barriers of entry to labor markets
Mhm.
in general. It enables people from very diverse backgrounds to participate in traditionally very technical and at the same time high value work. So I'll give you a
Mhm.
couple of examples.
Okay.
Say in the market, in the Upwork labor market, people are using AI tools to make 3D content generation work much easier and faster, right? 3D content generation is very important for work like virtual reality and game design.
Yeah.
Nowadays, people can just use text prompts to make these 3D objects that previously required very heavy coding. And relatedly, in design category, people are using AI to do content generation and or use AI for photo and video editing.
Mm.
Um, and in other categories like admin support, what we've seen is that people who are working as virtual assistants, they're integrating AI into their kind of toolkits to allow them to increase the speed and also the volume of the work. And I love this next example, which is I saw some job posts where people are hiring AI chief of workflows. So these are some roles that require people to use AI to streamline organizational processes. So I would say just based on these anecdotal examples, I do feel fairly confident that AI is becoming very commonplace and it
Mhm.
really is empowering people to do work that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do before. And if that's a characteristic of a general purpose technology, and I would say that does make AI, especially generative AI, very kind of promising as a candidate to be really officially considered as a general purpose technology.
Yeah. Ted, thank you so much for sharing those examples too. I love to see it because I think, a lot of the conversations that I see in the headlines and in the news is still around fear. And, I think
Mhm,
to your point, there's two sides of the coin as you start off this conversation, this framework that you've got, the reinstatement effect and the replacement effect. And there's going to be both sides. I mean, to me, like again, studying more in the org behavior literature, skills bias, technology change, we know that technology changes the skills that are required, the type of value that's required.
mhm,
And I think if I can summarize what I'm hearing from your research so far is that freelancers in particular, because that's the labor market we have, the freelancers that are able to work alongside AI and or even change the type of work that they're doing, like the example you just gave of the chief AI workflows, like they're changing the way,
mhm.
like the demand is changing a bit. If you can modify and change and adapt, this is a good thing for many people. I
Yes.
think the concern is for those that are listening today and wondering, okay, what do I do with AI? Is if you're planning on doing the exact same thing the way you have, I think that is where there's probably more caution and concern that
Yeah.
value is changing and what clients are demanding is changing, and you have to
Yeah.
continue to go with that current. Is kind of what I'm thinking. Is that a fair
Yeah.
summary? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say I'm lucky in the sense that, as I mentioned, I work with Upwork Platform Data, which is just a very dynamic and rich data set. And a lot of the changes we observe in relation to AI just happen so quickly. Part
Yeah.
of that is due to as you mentioned, the very much adaptability of freelancers compared
Mm,
to traditional full-time employees, right? And I think that is adaptability is very much a characteristic that will be important for not just freelancers but people in general that are thinking about what I'm going to do with AI in the future, right?
yeah. And listen, for those that are joining us, I know people are tired and the burnout is high and having to learn a new skill and continue to change. But that is the important work that we have to get done here. I think in the future of work now, I do feel like we're at this
Yeah.
critical crossroad where freelancers are, as you just mentioned, ahead of the curve here. Their
Hmm.
job depends on it, their livelihood,
Yes.
and they don't have as much bureaucracy, right? They're working for themselves, and so they're making the runways required to learn and adapt. And I think that's a call to action to anyone joining us today is making sure whether you're a freelancer on the full-time workforce side, there is like we have the runway is getting shorter, I would say, for
Yeah.
time to upskill and reskill and take advantage of this new opportunity that we're seeing right now in this labor market, which I think is critical. So, Ted, I have one more question while we have you, and I'm sure the audience would love to know. You're just such a wealth of information, and I'm curious, we're getting close to 2025. What are the AI trends that people joining us today should really be looking out for?
Sure. I'm in general a little bit hesitant to make predictions because as economists, our track record is not great of making predictions. But I will focus on kind of sharing what I know and try to extrapolate based on kind of the
Okay.
data and findings that we already have. Again, because of everything I just highlighted about kind of the broad reach of AI, I do think AI is going to become more deeply embedded in the everyday tasks that people are doing. And I
Mhm.
think there's a term for this. People call it augmented working. And additionally, because of the very much fast and furious development of AI models, these AI tools will become more powerful. So we
Mhm.
will see AI being used in more multimodal tasks. What that means is, for example, think about a workflow that combines not just text, but also images and audio. I think AI is going to be more influential in those multimodal task completion.
Yeah.
And one more thing is, I would say AI agents, which we haven't
Mhm.
talked about. They definitely are going to become more powerful and perform more complex duties autonomously. And I think what that entails is that right now, most of us think about AI mostly just as tools. But because of the rise of AI and future rise of AI agents, I think AI is going to become more like colleagues or just coworkers, and I think that presents both challenges and opportunities. I would say one challenge is that this reframing of thinking of how we position AI in the workplace, right? So
Mhm.
if AI is going to become more like a coworker, how are you going to navigate and negotiate the autonomy
Mhm.
as a human worker yourself with
Yeah.
AI? And then I would say for leaders and managers, how do you properly define these emerging roles of who does what in this new paradigm of human AI teaming? I think that is a question that leaders have to think about when they are trying to improve the work outcomes by integrating AI. But I would say, as you mentioned before, I think there is definitely a lot of opportunities for new work and new fields for people to try out because how AI is really just democratizing some previously inaccessible fields. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for not just freelancers, but people in general to just kind of pursue things that you may find interesting, but didn't necessarily have the toolkits
Mm.
to do.
Yep.
And I would just conclude by just reiterating what you said about the importance of adaptability as a
Mhm.
critical skill in this future job market fueled by AI, right? I think people who are able to figure out their comparative advantage in relation to AI and pick up the skills that they need and who can optimize their workflows by integrating AI, I would say those are the people who will be most likely to succeed in this
Yeah.
future labor market.
Totally. Well, Ted, thank you so much for coming. And, I hope those of you who joined us today enjoy this conversation. Please feel free if you have any additional questions. We'll be following alongside this chat today. So please feel free to pop them in. Please do yourself a favor, follow Ted Liu as well on LinkedIn. He's going to be posting a lot more insights. I know, Ted, you're working on another project that's coming out in January based on our
Mhm.
platform data that's all around the top skills that we're seeing in demand and growing on our platform. So please follow along with Ted. and the Upwork Research Institute. And, the message of the day is continue to upskill and adapt. That is going to be the way forward in the future of work. And I'm optimistic, Ted, if people can make the time and space to do so, I think there's some really exciting work ahead for us. So thank you for joining us today. And again, Ted, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.